In the course of this public presentation, we'll be going into question and answer segment. Please, I want to quickly put this across to the audience. When you are recognized to speak, you tell us your name, the organization you are representing, and please, the use of uncultured language or vulgar language will not be acceptable here today. I want to thank you for your readiness to cooperate with us to enable us to have a very robust interaction. Thank you very much. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while we await the presence of some of our principals, let me quickly introduce some of our dignitaries that are seated here. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to let you know that we have with us the permanent secretaries of the ministry with us. We have the Permanent Secretary of Finance, Federal Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning with us, Malam Aliyu Hamid. I welcome you, sir. Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause, please. We have the Permanent Secretary, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Olushola Idowu with us. I welcome you. Okay. The Accountant General of the Federation, Mr. Idris Ahmed with us. Thank you so much. We equally have with us the sitting DG, Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Giwa Abdul Rashid. He is the Director of Budget Monitoring and Evaluation. Thank you so much. We want to assure you that the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, will be joining us online. I want to equally assure you that the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning will be joining us online too, Prince Clem Agba. I want to equally recognize the presence of the DG National Institute for Labor Studies, Ilorin Comrade Isa Aremu. I welcome you, sir. Thank you very much. I welcome the Director of Revenue and Fiscal Policy, Budget Office of the Federation. I welcome you wherever you are seated. Thank you very much. We have the PAMSEC Special Duties, Federal Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Alhaji Shehu Aliu Shikafi. I welcome you. I welcome the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. I welcome you, sir. I welcome you, ma'am. Thank you. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that we are set. The train is ready to move. Once again, I welcome you. I thank you for finding time to be with us. Like I said earlier, when we all think alike, no one is thinking. That is the essence of this forum. Information, like I said, is power. Correct information brings clear thinking, and clear thinking helps people to make sound judgment. Like I said, we share very useful information at forums like this for people to know precisely what governance is all about. Without taking much of our time, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that some of our dignitaries, wherever you are seated, as we continue this program, will recognize you duly. Thank you so much for your understanding. I was made to understand that the Chairman, Senate Committee on Finance, Senator Adiola, will be joining us too online. Thank you so much. Wherever you are, if you're hearing us. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our time is fast spent. We'll just kickstart this program and move very fast. We'll just take the welcome remarks by the Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akabueze. This will be done online. Please, our online personnel, please let's just have the welcome remarks. Thank you very much. DG, we are waiting, sir.
I'm sorry about that. I was muted and I couldn't unmute myself. But I hope you can hear me now. Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, Chairman, Finance Committee of the Senate, Distinguished Senator Solomon Adeola, Permanent Secretaries, Heads of Agencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Things of Industry, gentlemen of the press, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome us all to this event, the public presentation of the details of the 2022 budget, which was signed into law on the 31st of December 2021 by His Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I'm thankful that technology has enabled us to reach a wider public on these presentations, these public presentations and consultations regarding, the budget. And this is one of the positive sides to the COVID-19 phenomenon that has been with us over the last, 2 years. This forum this morning is not simply a ritual, and we always, strive to make that point. But this event underscores the commitment of the administration to open budget, principles. This event underscores our commitment to a system of budgetary discipline. Today is the second business day in this new year, and we are already here today having this event. And the idea is, to basically make sure that, government itself can get going right off the blocks, and, all the other, agencies, the private sector, the non-government organizations that also depend on government can get going with their businesses, because we really do not have time to waste and cannot afford to lose any time, given the enormity of the work that lies ahead of all of us. The budget, the details of which you will shortly be receiving from the Honorable Minister, is not just a statement of projected revenues and expenditures, but the budget is an embodiment of government's policy, direction, and actions that are all aimed to achieving its goals and objectives. But for me, one of the big things that I have been harping on lately is that the budget is also a moral document. Because the budget, when you look at the budget reflects what and who the government cares about. And I hope that as you look at the details of this budget, it will be evident who and what this government cares, about. Over the last 5 years, we have focused keenly on improving our budget credibility. And so, year after year, we have sought to narrow the gap between our projections and the actual outturns, both on the revenue and expenditure side. Nevertheless, it's important to underscore the point that the budget is also an aspirational document. And so our goal is not really, if we did so, it would be fantastic. But then, if we do not score 100% performance, it is because the budget necessarily contains a stretch factor. And we're glad that our insistence on embedding a stretch factor in our budget is beginning to pay off. On independent revenues, for instance, by 2016, the aggregate actual performance on independent revenues was barely over 200 billion naira. But we kept insisting that the potential was more than that. And over the years, we got knocked for the gap between our projections and actual. But we insisted that the potential existed to do much better. And rather than focus on that gap, we focused on what actions were needed to do. And it's my pleasure today to report that, as you will hear shortly, on independent revenues, by November 2021, we already had recorded over 1.1 trillion naira as actual, which underscores our belief over the years that that line of revenues could do much better than it had done traditionally. And as we therefore evaluate the presentations today, I'd like us to keep these factors in mind. With these remarks, once again, it's my honor and privilege to welcome you all to this event. Thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to a very robust, engaging session this morning. Thank you.
The DG was so explicit enough. Very short remarks and very clear intention. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, they said the secret of success is constancy of purpose. Some people somewhere must have toiled very hard, and they must have been working and they are still working very hard to make things work in this country. They said a woman cannot be assessed with the words of her mouth alone, but her ability to deliver democratic dividends to the people. One of such is this wonderful woman who has been working very hard to ensure the success of our great country, Nigeria. At this point, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to invite the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budgets and National Planning, Mrs. Dr. Zainab Shamsuna Ahmed, for her presentation.
Face mask, should I remove? Good morning. Good morning. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me especially recognize my colleague and brother who had to join us virtually today, the Honorable Minister of State Budget and National Planning, and also my colleagues, ministers that have joined us virtually. But also special recognition to the Chairman, Senate Finance Committee, Senator Adiola Olamilekon, Permanent Secretary Finance, Permanent Secretary Budget and National Planning, Permanent Secretary Special Duties, Director of Budget of the Budget Office of the Federation, Mr. Ben Akaboze. Perhaps over the last 6 years, this is the only time that he's not in these presentations, and for a very good reason. Good morning, DG. Also, the Accountant General of the Federation, directors in the ministry, heads of agencies, development partners, civil society organizations, representatives of civil society organizations, good morning, representatives of the private sector, organizations, members of the media, thank you for coming. Our virtual audience, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have quite a large presentation, but let me just state that this presentation, copy of this presentation will be posted on the website of the Budget Office of the Federation, as well as on the website of the ministry, so I will not go through every line or every page, and I want to invite you to download, visit the website and get a copy of this presentation. The outline of my presentation is to, first of all, give you a brief introduction and an overview of the fiscal outcomes for the 2021 budget, give an update on the implementation of the 2021 budget, which, by the way, I'm sure you've heard by now that the capital component of the 2021 budget has been extended from December 2021 to 31st of March 2021 to improve utilization of funds that we have deployed to ministries, departments, and agencies. We'll look very briefly at the global outlook and domestic developments. Also, the approach that we took to the preparation of the 2022 budget, a brief introduction of the National Development Plan, which is the basis of the budget, as well as all our fiscal plans, the underlying macroeconomic assumptions that we made, the parameters and the targets for the budget, as has been appropriated into law by the National Assembly, and also the 2022 budget, an overview of the revenue, the expenditure, and the deficit financing. I will also be speaking to you very briefly on the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative and give you some key highlights of the 2021 Finance Act, which is designed to support the implementation of the 2022 budget. Then some critical sectoral allocations in the budgets, which is also quite extensive, and I will advise you to look at it online, and then we will be rounding up and go on to discussions, which is the reason why we're here today. So I want to remind us all that His Excellency, Mr. President, signed the 2022 Appropriation Bill into law on the 31st of December 2021. Having previously laid the budget proposal before the National Assembly on the 7th of October 2021. The President had similarly assented into law the 2021 budget extension, which I just spoke to you about. And also, Mr. President also signed the 2021 Finance Bill, which is designed to enhance the implementation of the 2022 budget. You recall that there was a supplementary budget that was passed last year in July by the National Assembly and assented to into law by the President, bringing the total aggregate budget for 2021 to 14.5 trillion. The 2022 Appropriation Bill that has been passed into law enables us to start implementation by the 1st of January 2022. And as directed by His Excellency the President, the executive arm of government will submit a request for amendment and environment to the National Assembly as soon as they resume to enable us have some amendments done to reduce some of the impact of the changes that had been made by the National Assembly, but also to ensure that some of the legacy projects of His Excellency the President that are designed at enhancing infrastructure, promoting social inclusion, and strengthening the resilience of the economy are properly funded. And we hope a lot of them will be concluded and commissioned during the lifetime of this administration. Nigeria, you recall, has posted its fourth consecutive quarterly economic growth in the third quarter of 2021. Since the resumption of growth in the fourth quarter of 2020 and recovery from the deepest economic recession that our country has ever witnessed, real GDP grew by a record 5.01% in the second quarter of 2021, one of the biggest growth recorded by any nation across the sub-Saharan Africa nation, and in fact, the highest growth recorded by our economy since 2014. Recovery was sustained by a growth of 4.03% in the third quarter of 2021, and this recovery was fueled by the implementation of government's Economic Sustainability Plan, the ESP, as well as the easing of COVID-19-induced restrictions on economic activities. Growth in the non-oil sector has shown greater resilience, recording 5.44% in real terms during the third quarter of 2021. The growth recorded in the non-oil sector was mainly driven by trade, information, and as well as communications, specifically the telecommunications sector. Other drivers of growth in the non-oil sector include financial and insurance sector, manufacturing, that is food, beverages, tobacco, agricultural sector, specifically crop production, transportation and storage, including road transport. In real terms, the non-oil sector contributed 92.51% to the GDP in the third quarter of 2021, higher than the share recorded in the corresponding period in 2020 of 91.27%. Again, to restate that the Nigerian economy is truly diversified, that the oil and gas sector today contributes just around 7.5% to the Nigerian economy. Nigeria's inflation rate has sustained its decline. The inflation dropped further in the month of November 2021 to 15.4% from a four-year high of 18.17% in March 2021. Urban inflation rate has also increased by 15.92% year-on-year in November 2021, while the rural inflation rate had increased by 14.89% in November 2021. The downward trend is expected to continue throughout the year 2022. The NBS, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, Q4 2020 estimates put unemployment at 33% and underemployment at 22.84%. High unemployment and underemployment rates have implications for poverty incidences in the population. So now let's move on to an overview of the 2021 fiscal outcomes and the update on the 2022 budget implementation. Again, let me say this is a provisional report. The 2021 financial year record has still been updated and reconciled, so this is not the final fiscal report. The performance indicators of the budget are as shown on the table in the screen before you, shows that the oil price benchmark, the actual oil price benchmark as at November 2021 was $79.31 per barrel. This is against a budgetary provision of $40 per barrel. Oil production, on the other hand, recorded a dip of 1.56 million barrels per day in November as against 1.86 million barrels per day that we planned for in the 2021 budget. Exchange rate was at the NIFEX rate at 410 naira 15 kobo. Inflation was 15.4% as of November, and the growth rate that we expected to achieve at the end of 2021 is 3%, but in actual fact, the third quarter report of 2021 was 4.03%, and we do hope that we'll be able to reach this 3% when we see the last quarter 2021 report. So at slide 11 is an update on the revenue performance of the 2021 budget. The fiscal numbers again are preliminary and will be updated as the reconciliation process is not yet concluded. As at November 2021, federal government's aggregate revenue was 5.51 trillion. This represents 74% of the prorated target. The federal government share of oil revenues was 970.3 billion, representing 53% performance prorated target for the oil and gas revenues. Federal government share of non-oil tax revenues totaling 1.62 trillion, representing 118.8% over and above the prorated target. This is contributed to by the company income tax and value-added tax collections of 718.58 billion and 360.56 billion, representing 115% and 165% respectively of the prorated targets. Customs revenue was 542.11 billion, representing 104% of the prorated target. This is just to reaffirm that the non-oil sector of the Nigerian economy is growing very well, and that the larger proportion of revenues in Nigeria today is contributed by the non-oil sector. Other revenues amounting to 2.8 trillion, of which federal government independent revenue contributed 1.10 trillion, while government-owned enterprise revenues was 1.10 billion, while government-owned enterprise revenue is 1.2 trillion. This is what the DG budget mentioned, that for the first time, we have been able to cross the 1 trillion mark in terms of independent revenues. And we expect better performance even in 2022. So slide 12 is just a table showing the line-by-line revenue items. I advise that you should visit this and look at it more closely. At slide 13 is an update on the expenditure performance. On the expenditure side, 12.56 trillion, representing 94.1%, has been spent out of the 13.57 trillion prorated target of the budget. This is prorated as at November 2021. This performance is inclusive of expenditure estimates of government-owned enterprises, but excludes project-tied loans, because we're still reconciling the numbers for the project-tied loans. Of this expenditure, 4.2 trillion was expended for debt service, 3.02 trillion for personnel costs, including pensions, and as at November 2021, 3.4 trillion had been expended for capital expenditure. Of this, 2.98 trillion represents 83% provision of the ministries, departments, and agencies' capital, while 369.9 billion is from multilateral, bilateral project-tied loans, as well as 49.52 billion government-owned enterprises capital expenditure. So slide 14 shows you a bit more detail on the line-by-line expenditure items. And at slide 15 is some information on the deficit and deficit financing. So the fiscal deficit that we had projected for in the 2021 budget was 6.449 trillion. And as at January to November, 5.911 trillion has been expended. Is the prorated component, and within that period, that is again January to November, the actual fiscal balance was 7.052 trillion. This represents a deficit way higher by 1.14 trillion than what we had planned in the budget for 2021. The financing for this budget included funding that has been realized from multilateral, bilateral project-tied loans, as well as funding from borrowings, including domestic and foreign borrowing. So now we move to an update on the global outlook and domestic development for the year 2022. So the global economy is projected to grow by 5.9% in 2021 and 4.9% in 2022. The euro area is projected to grow by 5% in 2021. China's economy is projected to pick up to 8% in 2021 and then has a dip to 5.4% in 2022. In Africa, the economic activities in sub-Saharan Africa region are expected to pick up in 2021 and 2022, albeit unevenly, and the proportions are 3.7% and 3.8%. I say unevenly because the growth rates across the countries are different. But despite the adverse effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, Egypt grew at 3.6% in 2020, owing to the high domestic consumption that Egypt has, and they have been able to really capture those consumptions. Real GDP growth for Egypt is expected to hit 5.3% in 2022. South Africa is projected to recover from a decline of minus 6.4% and grow by 5% in 2021 and 2.2%. So again, you'll notice a dip in 2022, and that's the pattern globally. Nigeria's economy posted a 4.03% year-on-year growth at the third quarter of 2021, signaling sustained economic recovery. The non-oil sector is a significant contributor to this recovery. The IMF has revised Nigeria's GDP growth forecast upwards from 2.6% and 2.7% in 2021 and 2022, respectively. So the previous focus was 2.5 and 2.6. The new focus is 2.6 and 2.7. That's by the IMF. So at slide 18 is just still further information regarding the global GDP. I advise you to look at that at your spare time. And then now let's talk about the approach that we took for the 2022 budget. The 2022 budget seeks to continue the reflationary policies of 2020 and 2021 budgets, which helped put the economy back on the path of recovery and growth. The 2022 budget was prepared taking into consideration the policies, strategies contained in the 2022 to 2024 medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper. The budget was prepared using the zero-based budgeting approach and in line with government's development priorities as articulated in the new National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. Allocations to ministries, departments, and agencies were guided by the core objectives of the plan. At slide 21 is just to give you a short highlight of the 2021 to 2025 National Development Plan. So there are three thematic areas. The first is accelerating growth. Second is deepening the initiatives to diversify growth in the Nigerian economy. And the third is to foster sustainable development. The plan has an investment size of 368 trillion naira, and this will be funded by the federal government, the state government, as well as the private sector. For the investment size, the expected financial contribution is 49.7 trillion to be contributed by the government, the federal and the state government, The subnational government's contribution will be 20.1 trillion, while the federal government contribution is 29.6 trillion. But the story really is in the contribution of the private sector. We are projecting that the private sector needs to contribute 293.3 trillion over this 5-year development plan period. And what this means to us as governments is that we must do everything that we can to support the private sector to succeed, to be able to expand their businesses and expend this size of money in terms of investments within the Nigerian economy. So the 2022 federal government budget is the first key public sector contributor to the implementation of this plan. At slide 22 is to show you the vision of the plan, which is to be a country that has unlocked its potentials in all sectors of the economy for sustainable, holistic, inclusive, and national development. And also, the mission will be to guide the implementation of programs and policies that promote rapid multi-sectoral growth and development of the Nigerian economy. And then there are 3 pillars, as indicated in the slide, and I hope that you have find time to look at it. Again, at slide 23, is the sectoral composition of the National Development Plan. So you see the pillar of the economic growth and development, the infrastructure pillar, which includes transport, power, including alternative power, housing and urban development, digital economy, science and technology, and the financial sector. You have public administration, human capital development, including education and human resources, health, food, and nutrition, the social development sector, regional development sector, as well as the plan implementation and the plan monitoring and evaluation. So next, we move on to the underlying macroeconomic assumptions, parameters, and targets that have been set in the 2022 Appropriation Act. The key assumptions in the 2022 Appropriation Act are, first of all, an oil production number of 1.88 million barrels per day, an oil price benchmark of $62 per barrel, an exchange rate of 410 naira 15 kobo to $1, an inflation rate of 13%, a nominal consumption of 119.29 trillion, and a nominal GDP of 184.39 trillion, and a GDP growth of 4.20%. At slide 26, is to explain to you some of the assumptions that we made. First of all, on the crude oil production. So although Nigeria's total production capacity is 2.5 million barrels per day, current year to date, crude oil production, and this is as at November, is 1.4 million barrels per day, slightly short of the OPEC quota and the OPEC production quota that has been set for Nigeria. But there's also an additional 300,000 barrels per day of condensates, which brings the total production to 1.6 million barrels per day. The Energy Information Administration, EIA, expects that the global oil production will increase to match rising levels of global oil consumption. OPEC crude production is projected to average 28.34 million barrels per day in 2022, higher than the 26.94 million barrels per day in 2021. This means Nigeria will end up with a higher OPEC production quota. The National Assembly had maintained the proposed volume of 1.88 million barrels per day, including condensates, in the 2022 budget. And this means that the executive and the legislature must push the oil and gas sector to attain these production volumes, despite the fact that there was a slump in October and November. We understand that production has picked up to almost 1.8 million barrels per day in December. Exchange rate has been fixed at NAFEX rate, which is 410.15 naira to the US dollar, and this is the CBN NAFEX rate. We project our oil-based price at $57 per barrel in 2022, and this was done in consultation with NNPC and other stakeholders. And this projection, when we sent the proposal to the National Assembly, was premised on the average focus of leading financial institutions, factors driving the market fundamentals, global economic recovery, as well as plans by government and market sentiments. However, the National Assembly, reviewing the performance of the global crude oil price, had adjusted the price from $57 per barrel to $62 per barrel. And they had discussed with us their reasoning for that, and we agreed that it was a reasonable adjustment to make. The World Bank forecast that crude oil prices will average $74 per barrel in 2022 as oil demand strengthens and reaches pre-pandemic levels. And also the EIA expects Brent prices to average $70.05 per barrel. So these are the reasons why the National Assembly thought it was expedient to increase the crude oil price to $62 per barrel. At slide 28, consumption is projected to increase globally. Consumption in the Nigerian economy is expected to pick up by 9.36% to 149.35 trillion in 2022. Nominal GDP is projected to rise to 168.80 trillion in 2021 to 184.34 trillion in 2022. The real GDP, as I reported earlier on, we have pegged at 4.2%, and inflation, while it will continue to be double-digit, our projection is it will continue to decline throughout 2022. So if we move on now to an overview of the revenue and the expenditure, as well as the deficit financing of the new 2022 Appropriation Act. At slide 30, the projected aggregate revenue available to fund the 2022 budget of 10.74 trillion, inclusive of GOEs, is 32% higher than the 2021 projected revenue of 8.1 trillion. So without the government-owned enterprises' retained revenue, the federal government return revenue will be 9.01 trillion. To promote fiscal transparency, accountability, comprehensiveness, and allocation, we have indicated for the first time in the 2022 budget the allocations to TED Fund. In the past, it was not previously recorded as revenue. And the budgets of 63 government-owned enterprises are fully integrated in the 2022 budget. In aggregate, 35% of the projected revenues is to come from the oil-related sources, while 65% is to be earned from the non-oil sources. Again, this is underscoring the fact that government revenues now are largely from the non-oil sector of the Nigerian economy. At slide 31 is an overview of the revenue framework, showing you what was passed by the National Assembly in the 2021 budget, including the supplementary budget. The aggregate revenues at 6.77 trillion. Again, what is passed by the National Assembly in the 2022 budget, the aggregate of 9.012 trillion revenues. So there's a variance and improvement of 2.239 trillion. And this improvement is coming from both the oil as well as the non-oil sectors' revenue generations. At slide 32 is an overview of the expenditure framework in the 2022 budget. The 2022 aggregate federal government expenditure, including government-owned enterprises, project-tied loans, is projected to be 17.13 trillion. This is 18% higher than the 2021 budget. The recurrent non-debt spending is estimated to be 16.91 trillion, and this is 40% of the total expenditure and 30% higher than the provision in the 2021 budget. The aggregate capital expenditure is 5.96 trillion, This is 35% of the total expenditure of the budget. Again, this provision is inclusive of capital component of statutory transfers, government-owned enterprises, as well as project-tied loan expenditures. At 3.61 trillion, debt service is 21% of the total expenditure of the 2022 budget, and it is 34% of the projected revenue of the 2022 budget. Provisions to retire maturing bonds to local contractors and suppliers has been made in the budget in the sum of 290.71 billion, and this represents 1.6% of the total expenditure. This provision is in line with federal government's commitment to offset accumulated arrears of contractors' obligations dating back over a decade. So, as slide 33 is a table that shows you an overview of the expenditure framework, showing the first line statutory transfer, which is to National Assembly, Judiciary, and other agencies of government that are on first line charge. It was in the 2021 budget, the provision was 496 billion. In the 2022 budget, the provision has gone up by 373 billion to 869 billion. Debt service has also increased by 484 billion in the 2022 budget compared to 2021, and the aggregate expenditure of the budget has also gone up by 772 billion to compared to 2021 to 5.961 trillion naira. At slide 34 is some information on the overall deficit and the financial ratios relating to the budget. So the overall deficit is placed at 6.39 trillion for 2022. This represents 3.46% of the gross domestic product. Again, this is 0.46% higher than what has been permitted in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is 3%. Again, both the National Assembly, the Executive, as well as Mr. President, have agreed that the economy is still in some form of an emergency and crisis mode, a combination of the impact of recession that we are exiting from, and also the security situation that we have at hand that requires very extensive spending. The budget deficit is going to be financed by domestic borrowing as well as borrowing from foreign sources, but also multilateral and bilateral loan drawdowns of 1.16 trillion and privatization proceeds of 90.7 billion. So the ratios indicated here is showing you the proportion of government deficit to capital expenditure. So capital expenditure is in 2022 budget is 45% when you compare it to non-debt expenditure. When you compare it to the aggregate, it's 35%, as I reported earlier on. But the debt service to revenue ratio, while in the budget the projection is 34%, the actual might be higher than that as the budget implementation progresses. And you can see that the deficit to revenue ratio is already high at 5.9%. So at slide 35 is just for me to restate that the debt level of the federal government of Nigeria is still within sustainable limits. Borrowings are essentially done for capital expenditure as well as human capital development as specified in the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007. But having witnessed 2 consecutive economic recessions, we have had to spend our way out of recession, which contributed significantly to the growth of the public debt. It is unlikely that our recovery from each of the past 2 recessions will have been as fast without the sustained government expenditure funded largely by debt. at slide 36. So to compound matters, the country has technically been facing significant security challenges across the nation. This has necessitated massive expenditure on security equipment and operations, contributing to the fiscal deficit. So defense and security sector accounts for 22% of the total 2021 budget. Nigeria's deficit to GDP ratio, which is minus 4.3% as of November 2021, and debt to GDP ratios 30% as of September 2021, are still the lowest amongst the leading economies in Africa today. However, Nigeria's debt service to revenue ratio at 76% as at November 2021 is the highest amongst the African top economies. This is proof that what we have is not a classic debt sustainability problem, but a very significant revenue challenge. Tax rates and compliance ratios are significantly higher in these comparator countries. For instance, Nigeria's VAT rate is 7.5%, and it is the lowest in Africa today, and less than 50% of the average rate in Africa today. That is to say that the average rate of GDP in Africa today is 15%, and we're still at 7.5%. At slide 37, it's an overview of Nigeria's debt sustainability. The impact on Nigeria's debt structure has been contained from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the crude oil prices the crash in the crude oil prices that happened in the year 2020. Nigeria maintains one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios compared to its peers. And if you look at the bar chart on the left-hand side, you see Nigeria at 21.6%, Angola is showing there, Egypt at 19.2%, Ghana at 17%, South Africa at 77%, and others. On the right-hand side is the increased debt service cost to revenue ratio. And we're reporting this to again emphasize that we must all collectively work to increase revenue. You will see that at 2016, and consistently from 2016 right through to 2020, except for 2018, the margins are very tight. They're very tight. So we have to work towards increasing revenue. So at 3.34%, that is the debt service amount, while the actual revenue is at 3.9%. So it's a very difficult situation to manage when debt service is eating up most of our revenues. We also have been working to rebalance the optimal, to reach some kind of a better mix of our external to domestic revenue portfolio. So this chart, the bottom chart at slide 37, shows you the current mix at 61% for domestic and 38% for external borrowing. And then the chart on the right-hand side shows you the shift towards longer tenured maturities, which means less debt service obligations, but stretched over a longer period. And the ratio we've been able to attain so far to date is 86.92%. 86.2%. That is long maturities, and 13.8% shorter maturities. This took a lot of work by the Debt Management Office to do this rebalancing, and it's providing us some relief on the go. At slide 38, again, it's just to restate that the efforts we're working on is to fix our revenue challenges, because cutting expenditure is currently not a viable option, as our public expenditure to GDP ratio is also one of the lowest today amongst African leading economies. We must, however, continue to rationalize our expenditures. We cannot afford waste. In reality, our largest expenditure items are currently personnel cost as well as debt service. and then capital expenditure, which between them account for 85% of the 2022 budget. So there's little scope right now to cut this, apart from the fact that the most viable option to our fiscal challenge remains to grow our revenues and to plug leakages. Our target over the medium term is to grow our revenue to GDP ratio from the current 8-9% to 15% by the year 2025. And at the levels of revenue, and at that level of revenue, when we reach the 15% ratio, the debt service to revenue ratio will cease to be a concern for us as a nation. The Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, the SRGI, and other ongoing initiatives are planned to address this, and we're seeing positive results already. So again, let me remind us of what the SRGI is. The Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative is an initiative that is designed to address our revenue challenges. It is a systematic resource mobilization problem that we must address. The several measures that we have designed and encapsulated into the SRGI are designed to improve government revenues, entrench fiscal prudence with emphasis on achieving value for money. These measures include improving tax administration frameworks, including compliance for tax filing and payment compliance improvements. Other measures encapsulated in the SRGI include the evaluation of the processes and policy effectiveness of federal government incentives, also a review of sectors that are eligible for pioneer tax holiday incentives under EDITRA, dimensioning the cost of tax waivers, concessions, and evaluating their policy effectiveness, setting annual ceilings for tax expenditures to better manage their impact on the already constrained government revenues, ensuring that MDAs appropriately account for and remit their IGRs, their internally generated revenues. At slide 42, there are some other measures contained in the SRGI which are identifying and blocking existing revenue leakages to enhance compliance and reduce tax evasion, leveraging technology and automation, and plugging fiscal drainers like subsidies. Further enhancement measures for independent revenue collection has also been built into the SRGI, and government aims to optimize the operational efficiencies and the revenue generation focus of the government enterprises. We've also introduced new and further increases in existing pro-health taxes, for example, excise duties on carbonated drinks. At slide 43 is just to show you a picture of the improvement in the independent revenues. As reported earlier by the DG budget, if you look at the performance from 2017 and 216 billion, now up to 1.1 trillion in 2021. What did we do? In the 2020 Finance Act, we made a provision that requires that all government enterprises have pegged their expenditure to revenue ratio at 50%, which means as a GOE, you cannot spend more than 50% of the revenue that you generate. And that's why we have this spike. As at November, we have surpassed the collection targets that has been set in the 2021 budget. And for the first time, we have passed the 1 trillion naira collection mark of independent revenues at 1.04 trillion, as against what was budgeted for the year, which is 973.41 billion. Analysts have always considered our projections unrealistic, but we've always insisted that the potentials exist to grow federal government revenue. It was just a question of finding the best way to harness those revenues. So now I would like to speak to the forum about some of the key highlights in the Finance Act 2021, which is an instrument that is designed to enhance the implementation of the 2022 budget. Again, recall that Mr. President signed the Finance Act into law on the 31st of December 2021 alongside the 2022 Appropriation Act. The key reform areas amended by the Finance Act include domestic revenue mobilization, tax administration and legislative drafting, international taxation, financial sector reforms and tax equity, as well as public financial management reforms. So there are up to about 13 laws that have been amended by the Finance Act 2021, and this includes the Capital Gains Tax Act, Company Income Tax Act, Customs Excise Tariff Act, Consolidated, Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act, Personal Income Tax, Stamp Duties Act, Tertiary Education Tax Act, Value Added Tax Insurance Act, Nigerian Police Trust Fund Act, the Nasani Act, Financial Controls and Management Act, as well as the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The key critical policy trusts of the Finance Act 2021 are 5, and the first is domestic revenue mobilization. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Section 2 of the Finance Act addressed the issue of the partial rollback of exemption of shares from capital gains tax. So now the law has stipulated a 10% capital gains tax imposed on shares disposal transactions when the aggregate disposal exceeds 100 million naira in any 12 consecutive calendar months. And also, the reinvestment relief provided along with this tax is provided to defer capital gains tax where disposal proceeds are wholly or partially reinvested. So if you invest and the proceeds, you realize the proceeds of the investments and you invest them, you are not going to suffer the 10% capital gains tax. But if you don't reinvest and you exit and take your money, then you pay this tax. Taxpayers are required to report disposals annually for ease of administration to the FIRS for corporate tax shareholders and to the state inland revenues for individual taxpayers. At Section 17 of the Finance Act, we have made, there's a law now that has imposed duty on non-alcoholic carbonated sweetened beverages. So there's now an excise duty of 10 naira per liter imposed on all non-alcoholic carbonated and sweetened beverages. And this is designed to, 1, discourage excessive consumption of sugar in beverages, which contributes to a number of health conditions, including diabetes and obesity, but also this new sugar tax is introduced to raise excise duties and revenues for health-related issues and other critical expenditures. This is in line also with the 2022 budget priorities. The next slide is the Finance Act at Section 8 has made provisions relating to the FIRS automation and ICT reforms. The mechanism here is to enable FIRS to sanction non-compliant taxpayers that are refusing the FIRS access to their IT systems. FIRS is also authorized to deploy proprietary and third-party technology applications to collect information from taxpayers. The rationale behind this is to enhance the ongoing ICT and tax administration reforms by the FIRS to increase revenue generation, also in line with the objectives and priorities of the 2022 budget. As Section 21 is also provisions imposed on FIRS itself on taxpayers' confidential data, so that there is enhanced confidentiality on non-disclosure by FIRS and its staff of taxpayers' confidential data. So they have access to IT systems, but they are also required to keep priority information of taxpayers confidential. And there are steep penalties that have been provided in the law to penalize FIRS staff for breaches of confidentiality of taxpayers' data. Next slide is Section 4 of the Act, which is taxation of e-commerce businesses by non-resident companies on a fair and reasonable turnover basis, which has been set at 6% of turnover. This provision empowers FRS to assess non-resident firms to tax on fair and reasonable basis of turnover and from digital services provided to Nigerian customers. This also is introducing turnover tax on fair and reasonable percentage of profits earned from providing digital services to Nigerian customers. Let me just note that such digital services include apps, high-frequency trading, electronic data storage, online advertising, and several others. The rationale for this is to modernize the taxation of ICT and digital economy in line with current realities. And this is in conformity with the provisions of the National Development Plan of 2021 to 2025. As Section 30, 10, 31, and 14 of the Finance Act designed to amend some provisions, Section 30 of the Finance Act designed to amend Section 10 of VAT as well as Section 31 and 14 of VAT. It's in relation to VAT obligations of non-digital resident companies. And the mechanism that will be used is to restrict VAT obligations mainly to digital non-resident companies who supply individuals in Nigeria who cannot themselves self-account for VAT. So if you visit Amazon, we're expecting Amazon to add a VAT charge to whatever transaction you're paying. We're going to, I'm using Amazon as an example. We're going to be working with Amazon to agree to be registered as a tax agent for the FIRS. So Amazon will now collect this payment and remit to FIRS. And this is in line with global best practice. We'll be missing out on these revenue streams. We're also looking at reducing tax compliant burdens on non-resident taxpayers who are not required to register for VAT. So they don't really have to come and be registered companies in Nigeria. All they need is that arrangement with FIRS where they collect VAT on behalf of FIRS and remit to FIRS. And also to clarify that FIRS may appoint persons, including non-resident companies, for the purpose of VAT collection. And to clarify again that appointed persons may collect and remit taxes to FIRS pursuant to the relevant tax laws. The whole rationale for this is to modernize the taxation of ICT and digital economy in line with the National Development Plan, to enhance administrative modalities of taxation of non-resident taxpayers, and also to reduce compliance on the non-resident taxpayers, to reduce the compliance burden. Section 3 of the Finance Act has made some provisions on securities lending reforms, which are currently led by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the securities lending permits lenders to receive compensation from securities lending trading. It was not like this before, so now traders can actually receive a compensation for securities lending trading. And the rationale is tax equity to enable security lending reforms that are being championed by FIRS in line with the National Development Plan. Section 14 of the Act is on real estate investments, again reforms led by SEC, and to clarify that withholding taxes deducted from unit trust dividends are final taxes on unit trusts. And to clarify also that real estate investment trusts are special tax regime provisions applied to REITs set up as unit trust schemes. Again, the essence is tax equity in support of SEC's current real estate investment trust and unit trust financial sector reforms. As Section 33 of the Finance Act, 33, 34, and 35 is provisions relating to insurance companies' capitalization of the national reforms that is being undertaken currently by the National Insurance Corporation. This is amending the Insurance Act. So the mechanism will be to enhance the definition of share capital, also what is share capital requirement and determine the minimum capital to enhance NIACOM's recapitalization reforms. I'm sure you know that there's this recapitalization reforms that have been going on for a long time, and there's lack of clarity in the Insurance Act. This provision is providing that clarity. And also, this will enhance tax equity in support of the insurance sector reforms. As Section 22 of the Finance Act it reinforces the Federal Inland Revenue Service mandate as the principal tax collection agency. Currently, we have so many agencies, including some law enforcement agencies, that go about doing tax audits, go about raising tax assessment on companies, making the ease of doing business really complex for businesses. So this is to reinforce the lead role of the FIRS and to confirm that the FIRS is the principal tax revenue collection agency, and that they may collaborate with other law enforcement agencies of government to enhance tax collection. The tax administration reforms and the domestic revenue mobilization reforms are all designed to streamline and enhance tax collection for the country. As Section 37 is a provision for the NASENI levies, which comprises 1% of federation revenue, as well as 0.25% levy on profit before tax on major companies' turnover exceeding 100 million, equal to or exceeding 100 million in the banking sector, in the oil and gas sector, in the maritime sector, in the aviation sector, in the telecom sector, as well as ICT sectors. This provision also empowers FIRS to collect on behalf of NASENI this levy. This increased funding will accrue to a special NASENI account to fund budgetary expenditure targeted on nurturing a dynamic science and engineering sector in our country. The new changes that have been brought in is to enhance tax administration and also to ensure the growth of the science and technology sector of our country. Sections 38 and 39 of the Act also reiterates the supremacy of the fiscal rules that are provided in the 1999 Constitution as amended and other exempt money acts in public financial management. The purpose is to reiterate and reinforce the 1999 Constitution as well as the Finance Control and Management Act provisions vis-a-vis management of public finances and collection of revenue. So simply put, is to ensure that all revenues that are collected will go, first of all, as defined by the Constitution, into the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and whichever agency has any levies or taxes will be paid from there. So first to the pool, and then you're paid from there. The payment could be on first line charge, but first the monies are generated into the pool. This will enhance public financial management reforms. It will also help us to reduce revenue leakages and help us to better manage actual expenditure and ensure enhanced revenue performance. So at slide 51, this administration is committed to accelerating post-COVID-19 economic recovery through the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan has been designed to stimulate inclusive, diversified, and sustainable economic growth, to support private sector participation and productivity as well as competitiveness, to create productive employment and preserve jobs, to ensure macroeconomic stability, promote poverty reduction, and more equitable wealth creation. So accelerating strategic revenue generation initiatives through the SRGR and also through the instruments of the annual finance bills will help Nigeria to continue to diversify its revenue base, to ensure annual tradition of finance acts that accompany the annual budgets, that it will help us to maximize public financial management. While ongoing reforms are still working in the oil and gas sector, the non-oil sector also is producing real and tangible results. And there, remains significant gaps that we still continue to work on to bridge our revenue challenges. The Finance Act 2021 for the 2022 fiscal year is enacted, and it has provided significant tax, fiscal, and other reforms to drive domestic revenue mobilization. There will be more fiscal reforms and measures that might be required during the course of the year, and we will continue to deal with the emerging fiscal constraints and challenges as the year rolls on. This administration is committed to continuous dialogue and robust engagement with all stakeholders, key stakeholders, in respect of all the fiscal reforms that we are undertaking. So, to the final segment of this presentation, which is presenting some of the critical sectoral allocations in the 2022 budget. Starting with the education sector, you can see that we have made an aggregate provision of 1.23 trillion naira, and this is contributed by the provisions made to the main ministry and its agencies, 815, to UBEC, the Universal Basic Education Trust Fund, 112.29 billion, and to TET Fund at 306.00 billion. Next is the provisions that we made for the health sector. The health sector has an aggregate provision of 876.38 billion. This represents 5.1% of the federal government budget. The total provision of 770.87 billion has been made for the ministry and its agencies. There's also 49.37 billion that has been made for immunization, including counterpart funding for donor-supported programs, including the Global Support by Global Fund and Gavi, and also the transfer that we make routinely of 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund. At slide 55 is provisions again made to the defense and the security sector at 2.29 trillion, representing 13.4% of the budget for 2022. This is provisions made for the military, the police, the intelligence agencies, as well as the paramilitary services. We also made a provision of 1.42 trillion, representing 8.3% of the budget for infrastructure. This is provisions made for the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing, but also the Ministries of Power, Transport, Water Resources, and Aviation. Social development and poverty reduction got a provision of 462 billion. This is for the social investment program as well as the poverty reduction programs of government. So if you go to the website, you will find more details of some of the provisions. We could not take all of them in this presentation. The 2022 budget is expected to further accelerate the recovery of our economy. The budget reflects the key execution priorities and strategies defined in the National Development Plan. Government will continue to create enabling environment for the private sector to increase their investments and contribute more significantly to job creation, to economic growth, and to lifting millions of our citizens out of poverty. The early passage of the 2022 budget for implementation from 1st of January 2022 will significantly contribute towards achieving government's macro, fiscal, and sectoral objectives. However, revenue currently remains our main fiscal challenge. Government remains committed to effective implementation of the strategic revenue growth initiatives to improve revenue collection, expenditure management, as well as fiscal sustainability. We're optimistic that our ability to finance the budget, considering the positive global oil market outlook and the continuous improvement in our non-oil revenues. We are also exploring available opportunities for public-private partnerships, concessions, as well as climate finance arrangements to fast-track the infrastructure development. At slide 29, and this is just to state that achieving government's budget objectives require collective, decisive, as well as bold and urgent action. And government is determined to act as may be required. However, government also remains committed to implementing measures aimed at moderating the unintended negative effects of policies on the citizens. Safety nets will be provided to cushion the impact of reform measures on vulnerable segments of our society. Finally, let me say, as usual, we welcome citizens' participation in enhancing budget implementation, budget monitoring via the following electronic platforms: the iMonitor that sits on the website of the Budget Office, the Citizens Budget Monitoring app, which is available for free on Google Store, and also we have on the website a list of some key projects in the 2022 budget. I have presented only a few of them. The details of the Federal Government of Nigeria 2022 Appropriation Act and the Finance Bill for 2021 are available on the website of the Federal Ministry of Finance and Budget and National Planning, as well as the Budget Office of the Federation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. They said it takes a very successful personality to lead very successful people. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think the Honorable Minister deserves another round of applause, please. We are moving straight into a very important segment. We are moving straight into a very important segment of this forum today, which of course is the question and answer section. We will be interacting with the audience. Like I said from the onset, please, before I declare this segment open, when you are recognized to speak, you tell us your name, introduce yourself properly, and please, we appreciate if you restrict your questions or your comments to the issues addressed in the presentation of the Honorable Minister. Please, let us be mindful of our language. The use of vulgar language will not be acceptable at this forum at this point. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we continue in this segment, I want to let you know that our virtual audience are already on, and we still have some comments online. But first, we'll be taking 2 questions from this side, 2 from this side. We'll be doing that intermittently. Let me start from the right. Sir, we'll take you, you are number 1. The man with, you, sir. Yes. Any other person there? Okay, the man at the back, you are number 2. With the blue cap, you are number 2. Sir, you are number 3, number 4. We'll just go around like that. Number 1, please. Let's have your comment, please, or your question, please.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I just want to just respect all protocols. I'm Ade Adefeko. I'm the chairman export group of Masima, Chamber of Commerce. And what struck me in this whole presentation was the role of non-oil exports contribution. And I think it was quite impressive that in the 3rd quarter, in spite of the COVID year, we were able to grow non-oil exports to a very large extent. And that is something that is very heartwarming. And I think, I wouldn't say the Honorable Minister deserves a round of applause. I think the entire economy deserves a round of applause. Because for me and for us in Masima, we've always clamored for increase in non-oil exports contribution to the economy. And another thing I think I need to speak to, which the Honorable Minister probably didn't speak to in this because of the fact that she gave an overview. And probably breakdowns will be with her respective parastatals, speaking to the export expansion grant, particularly with the introduction of promissory notes, which again, I want to commend the Honorable Minister for again. This was pioneered under this administration, and I think for us non-oil exporters were quite impressed with it, particularly at the speed. And not only the speed, the transparency. And I think that's unparalleled. I'm speaking with all sense of responsibility, all sense of modesty, and I must say again, worthy commendation to the Honorable Minister and her team for making that happen. And I can see a few of those who have been part of this whole process of making sure that non-oil exports revenue is increased to a large extent. And I wear two hats. I'm equally the Vice President, Corporate and Government Relations of Olam International, which is the largest exporter after oil and gas in Nigeria. I mean, my company does run about between $300 and $500 million as a contribution to exports in Nigeria. I didn't say so, the Central Bank of Nigeria said so. So you can always verify from the Central Bank of Nigeria. In God I trust, every other thing is data. And at this juncture, I want to really say thank you for this breakdown, which some think is a yearly ritual, but it has become something that is, the sense of transparency is unparalleled because it's now on the website. You can question it, you can ask questions, and you can get answers therefrom. So thank you very much.
We take the second question, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Atai Joseph. I'm the chairman of the Technical Committee on Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises Business Membership Organizations of Nigeria. I want to commend the ministry, particularly the Honorable Minister, for this presentation. I have some comments to make. It's true now that we're expecting a lot to be contributed by the private sector in the 5-year development plan for the country. And it might be instructive to see the extent to which the private sector will be actually capacitated to deliver on this. Apart from creating enabling environment and policy provisions, are there critical investments, let's say in the area of cluster development and so on and so forth. I will also expect that it would have been good to have a sort of key performance indicators of previous budgets. What were we set to achieve and what did we actually achieve? Not only for last year, maybe in the past 5 years, to give us an indication as to how we are moving. And I believe doing that in the future will go a long way to help us. For instance, if you take the issue of deficit budgeting, do we intend by some means to reduce that over the years? Are we planning in the future to have surplus budget? And how do we achieve that objective? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We will take the third one from this side. Let's have you, sir.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Tope Fashua. I'm an economist. I run Global Analytics Consulting. I want to first of all commend the team, the minister and her team for the presentation, which was quite incisive and comprehensive. Also to commend the team for the fact that we are now looking at better volumes budget-wise in this country, and also the timeliness of the budget process. Of course, the fact that they want to kick in January 1st like it used to be. Also very important, the regularity that we're seeing in presenting a fiscal bill on a yearly basis, and of course the contents of that fiscal bill. I want to quickly say that the team should not be deterred. People will say, why are you having all these huge budgets? It's not particularly huge, especially on a per capita basis, and even on a dollar basis, because of course the citizens of this country are suffering, of course, from inflation, as well as the devaluations we have had over time. So I want to say, please push ahead. I want to please also query the low growth projection, especially coming from IMF and World Bank, why they believe that we should be growing at 2.6%. I know that the ministry is thinking of 4.2%. I believe we can do a lot better as well. Sometimes the idea is to be very optimistic and to push harder. Also that In terms of the diversification of the economy, the ministers has said, of course, we have diversified away from crude. But if you look at the Egyptian economy, which the minister also mentioned, the domestic consumption is where it's at. And when you look at the most diversified economies around the world, they are economies that are relatively self-sufficient in terms of producing what they need. And that's why I'm in support of some of the policies of the central bank in terms of not financing of, some of those things like Indian incense, candles, toothpicks, and so on. So the more of the capacity and productivity we can derive from in our own country by our own people, the better for us. So the diversification we're targeting is food diversification, not only in terms of crude oil. Also that the public needs to know that in the budget assumptions, when you have 1.88 million barrels a day at 62 barrels a day, if we multiply that, we see about $42 billion a year. The public seems to believe that all of that money is coming to the federal government, which is erroneous. According to NAITI, only about 35% of that comes to Nigeria. The rest goes to the production partners, IOCs, and so on. So please, I don't know if it will be possible to reflect the fact that not all of that money comes to Nigeria, only because we have to work with people who help us to produce. Also, budget per capita. Lastly, I'd say that the independent revenue that shows how much we've been losing. The rise in independent revenue from about 516 billion to 1.103 trillion shows that we've been losing quite a bit of money to inefficiency in the public sector, in the government-owned enterprises, many of which used to budget and spend almost everything that they budget on a yearly basis. It's commendable. We have to push further. Lastly, that the focus of the fiscal bill, especially in terms of diversifying the revenue base, of course, the focus on sin tax, luxury tax, on property tax, on capital gains tax, especially on properties. We were focused on CGT on shares, but also on property sales in this country. We hardly ever get anything back. Of course, it's difficult to track, but we must get it. The people who should pay are the big people in this country. The rich people are the ones that are avoiding the payment of their own fair share. And of course, the government should go after that. I think that many of these initiatives, I wish they had come 7 years ago. But of course, now that it's here, I believe that the government may be able to close in a flurry. Thank you very much.
Please, we would like you just make all your questions very short, please. Let's have you, please.
Okay. Thank you. Honorable Minister, very distinguished members of the Reserve Table. Chibuzo Okereke is my name. I lead the African Center for Legislative Practice and Democracy, and I work with the National Assembly. Let me commend the Honorable Minister for this important engagement. Mine will be questions. First is about citizens' participation, especially in budget monitoring and implementation. I would like to know how the ministry is leading the charge to make this possible. You mentioned the iMonitor, and I see that most of the initiatives are urban biased. And the issue about budget is always, how does this affect the common man on the street, the local people in our villages and what have you? Because federal government of Nigeria is everywhere in the territories of Nigeria. Unfortunately, only at the federal level do we see budget practice in the country. Most of the state activities are, not something we should talk about here. Also in the presentation, the Honorable Minister mentioned that about 63 agencies are now captured in the 2022 budget because of transparency and more accountability. I would like to know specifically, you mentioned Third Fund, and we have 62 others. What are these agencies, and what was happening there before? What informed this change of position, which is actually commendable? And finally, the component about zonal intervention project, reporting for performance of such projects. I'm not sure if it's always part of the performance report of the ministry. Are you considering doing that now, especially because implementation falls within your domain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Minister may wish to respond to all these questions. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your kind attention during the very long presentation. And also to, first of all, thank the President of NASIMA, who is also the chair of OLAM, for what was largely encouragement that was meant to recognize some of the work that we have done in respect of EEG, as well as the improvement in non-oil revenue performance. I hope all of our teams across the agencies are listening to, because the commendation is for you. And secondly, the chair of the technical committee on the MSME was asking to what extent will the private sector be capacitated to enable them to contribute that 298 trillion that I reported has been provisioned in the development, a new national development plan as private sector contribution. First of all, we're working to ensure that we're continuously refining our fiscal laws to make it easy for businesses to operate in Nigeria. We're also continuously working to provide fiscal infrastructure that are vital for optimal operations in business, such as power, water, roads, rail, because all of those contribute towards the cost of businesses. We're also working together with the monetary authorities to provide different financing packages that will enable the private sector access finance to develop their business. But we've also reached out, we're reaching out to the private sector to say, you can also participate even in the development of infrastructure, either alone under part of the incentive schemes that we have provided, such as the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme, where a company can elect to build a road with its resources and recover its investment over a period of time from tax credits, but also other incentives such as public-private partnerships and concessions. Right now, we have 4 of our airports scheduled for concession, and there are other projects that are listed for privatization under the privatization agency. There are a number of power projects that are already on the privatization block. So there are several opportunities, including the infrastructure company that has been recently set up, Infraco. Infraco is shopping for domestic and international investors to invest in that vehicle to enable us use government and private sector resources to roll out physical infrastructure that will be the path to enhanced economic development in our country. And yes, we do have KPIs that are set for every budget and also for all our development plans. As a matter of fact, each of us as ministers have signed up to deliver some certain KPIs, and we're measured on that by Mr. President it was on an annual basis, but we're told that this measurement will now be quarterly. There are some each ministry has key priorities, KPIs that they must deliver on. So we're being measured continuously, and we in turn measure the agencies that are also that we're also supervising. So I take note of your request that you said it would be nice to have a KPI report over the past 5 years. So we'll do that and post it on the website of the Budget Office, reporting on things like the fiscal deficit and some of the key performance indicators for the budget. But remember that we also have the medium-term expenditure framework, the MTEF. If you look at the MTEF, there's always report over the previous 3 years and then the subsequent 3 years going forward. So we do that on an annual basis. So if you look at the MTEF, you will see some of these records. But I get the point you're making. We can provide such a report easily and post it for public consumption. Dr. Tokbaya also made some commendations on the timelines that we have been meeting, the size of the budget, and the fiscal bills that we've been passing. But also queried the low growth that has been projected by IMF. IMF is IMF. We also query their projected growth, and we very frequently agree to disagree. The good story is in the past couple of years, our projections actually are realized over and above there. So it's good to say, okay, we actually achieved more than the IMF projected will achieve. So we cannot force the IMF or the World Bank to change what their assumptions are. We just do our own, and we look at their own also, and where we don't agree with their assumptions, we discuss it with them, but we often agree to disagree. And on the size of on the budget production numbers, it is true that the production in the country as assigned by OPEC is total national production. Not all of it is government production, but the revenues that we report in the budget is the government's component. So you see aggregate revenue, and then you see federal government's retained revenues. So that's what we account for. And I'm glad that you do understand that it's not all the revenue that comes to government. The oil and gas industry has key operators that are operating in the sector. They also are entitled part of the revenue. And the independent revenue projection improvement is a good story for us, but it also puts everybody on the spot to continue to do more, and we're expecting to do more in 2022. The finance bill that we have just, that the President has just signed into law, has made provision for some taxes. Already we had seen taxes in place, taxes on tobacco and alcohol. So what has just been added is taxes on carbonated and sweetened